Hello everyone, this is Priya Kannan. We've been exploring so far on the realms of human nature. What is the human mind all about? What is the structure that makes up one's self? And lastly, we also touched base on topics such as change, how to go about making that change, and whether or not change is lasting, permanent, whether it works, why in the case of certain people it works, in some people it doesn't, and why change is so fluctuating and so on. And hand in hand with change, we also discussed on the topic of manifestations, why manifestations doesn't work, which is the same as why change doesn't work in some sense. We also looked at the belief systems that people have and why deeply embedded belief systems have a certain impact in the manner in which a certain brain operates, the person's behavioral pattern operates, and how, if it can be reprogrammed, if that can be changed, and whether that change can remain, can be sustained over a period of time. So these were the areas that we looked at, and something in connection with this, which I really wanted to talk about last time, but which deserves a time of its own, is energy. So what is energy? We've all heard too many terms in terms of everything is energy, prana, which is life force, is energy. One needs energy mentally and physically to be able to operate effectively in the world, and so on. But what is it? What is it actually, and how does it work when it comes to the human psyche and the realm of consciousness, the human consciousness? How does it actually work? So these are the things that we're going to be covering today, and possibly it might run into two parts, but I'll try to make it as short as possible. What is energy really? When we think about energy, is it what comes to mind? Is it heat? Is it light? Is it sound? Is it atoms? Is it nuclei? Is it cells? What is it that comes to mind when we talk about energy? Is it electricity? What is it that comes to mind typically for a person, particularly people who want to dive into the realm of consciousness and human nature and human behavior and human thought? And what is its relevance in our day-to-day life, besides the fact that the body has to have energy for it to be able to function? Without energy, the body is dead. So you have to have that energy. That life-sustaining life force is needed for one to survive and sustain one's life in a healthy way. Besides that, from the point of view of energy in the realm of consciousness, energy in the realm of human nature, how does it work actually? What is it? I mean, what is it? We looked at so many things in terms of thought patterns. We looked at behavioral patterns, but it surely must need some energy, right? Without energy you can't think. So thought is energy in some way, but want to make it clear something. See, energy is so vast a topic, it wouldn't do much justice to just briefly mention at a very superficial, cursory level, which is probably what a 30-minute video can do. But I'll do my level best to give a pointer or an idea that might make one want to think in terms of the deeper underlying implications of energy. Really, it's fascinating. So when we talk of energy, energy has certain particles, right? It is never in isolation from particles. I mean, there is one form of energy that is in isolation from particles, which is called dark energy or pure energy, but that's a different thing. That is not what we are concerned with for the time being when we discuss the realms of human consciousness. We want to talk about the sort of energy that actually plays a direct part in the energy that we consume, the energy that is within the universe, right? So when we talk of this, there's something that's going on, right? So to see, when I was making this inquiry for a long time, over a number of years, it occurred to me at some point that to simply accept what's been given to you, not to say that what's been given to you is right or wrong, but there are questions that come up along the way which you cannot ignore, which you should not ignore. even if it questions even if it means you're questioning a certain authority or questioning what's been given to you. And that's the basis of inquiry. Without this questioning of assumptions, without this questioning of what you've been told is so and so, is this way and this way, there is no revelation for yourself, there is no discovery for yourself. And so in my case, no matter how much I scratched the surface, I was just coming to this corner, on this point, on what is the self made up of. One thing is clear, it comes up only in thought. It doesn't exist in isolation apart from thought. That much is clear. But what is it for something that is so intrinsically of no value? In the sense, somewhere along the way in thinking, this error has happened. This error that there is an identity. It's an error, or it was intended as a byproduct. Let's take it whichever way you want. But there is this this mistaken notion of something to be existing which really is not in existence on its own, right? That has taken a shape and a form as I am only talking about the human consciousness. Again, I'm making it clear, this has nothing whatsoever to do with any scriptural definitions. This is my own definitions based on the inquiries that I've been making all along. And perhaps you might find some sense in this. Perhaps this is an inquiry in itself, because right now this is not a lecture, this is actually an inquiry I'm making along with you. So if you can follow along with me, perhaps there's that revelation for you. There are further questions in your mind that might provoke further thoughts, which will lead you into great discoveries for yourself. That's the whole idea behind these videos. So this is something that's come up by accident, by way of this I that's come up, and it finds its nourishment in and through all the experiences in life, without itself having an existence on its own as an entity in isolation from the experiences. If I, this individual that one thinks of oneself as, if that were to be real, if that were in fact an existence, surely one should be able to put a finger on it and say, there I am, that is me. But you can't, because it's not a physical thing. To point at the body and say, there I am, this is me, has no meaning, because the body is not the one that feels feelings such as jealousy, such as anger, such as hatred, such as prejudices. The body is not the one that's feeling it, but there's something else that's going on inwardly. And it is that person that dictates everything that goes on, even including what's happening in your physical body, to a large or a small measure. And I wanted to know what is the impact, what is the relevance of what goes on inside. Why should that dictate how one's health is, one's behavioral patterns, which is physically tangible in the world? For instance, if you gain weight and lose weight, like we discussed in the previous two videos, and I keep repeating that again and again because that's such an obvious thing, which we see in our day-to-day life in so many people. And so many can relate to this, right? This inner struggle constantly with wanting to lose weight, and then they gain weight, and they lose weight, gain weight. The same thing goes for all other hard habits as well, which we had a look at last week and the week before. Things like smoking, drinking, drugs, and so on and so forth. And these are and there are people who suffer, terribly suffer. I say suffering deliberately as just one word encompassing within it so many range of suffering. If you have a hell of a lot of anger pent up in you, there are a lot of anger issues, let's say, that's a sort of suffering, because for everything and anything, you're just so irritable. You're not able to relate to the world in a harmonious way. Your relationship with the world, with your near and dear ones, with your own family, no matter what your intentions are, but it just comes from that, it stems from that anger, you see. So there is something that's going on inwardly that makes you react a certain way externally in the world, right? So in that sense, to some extent, this inward entity, which is not something that you can lay a finger on, put a finger on and say, this is me, really keeps on dictating, this inner voice that keeps on dictating what you should do, shouldn't do, what is right, what is wrong, to indulge, not to indulge. This constant mental chatter, this constant mental voice that keeps on going. So one ought to stop at some point and question for oneself, what is this? What is its relevance? And how does something that I am not able to see for myself, right? If that were real, I really should be able to see it. If that were a fact as my physical body is, I should be able to see it. I should be able to come face to face with it at some point. But I can't, except through the effects, right? Through the effects of that which is taking place in my life. There is no way for me to say, I am there. So there's so many things I want to cover in this, because to talk of one side and leave the others would be so one-sided, but still I'll do my best. And since we decided we'll discuss on energy, we should just stay to the topic. So there's some energy that's going on, right? And it's through its effect that you come to know of something else that may be in existence, may not be in existence. So for the sake of this inquiry, we will not conclude that it isn't there or it is there, this I, but we'll just say that it is something that triggers a set of effects in one's own life by way of behaviors, predominantly your behavioral patterns, right? And that in turn has a certain rippling sort of effect on everything that it touches. So when I say everything that it touches, my words has a certain impact, let's say, on the person who's listening to it. It's just words, it sounds, yes, it sounds. So that's where I had my first clue. So to speak of something, making a lot of assumptions just because it's been given to you as so, doesn't make a lot of sense. When you actually scratch the surface, there's more to how there are more dynamics involved than just one form of energy, you see. So what I'm trying to say is, energy, when it combines with other forms of energy, it comes together to form complex structures, like let's say atoms, nuclei, and cells and so on. But there is which has mass, right? But surely thought, which uses energy, that you can say thought itself is energy, because when you think, there is certain energy that's getting consumed. Without that energy, you can't exercise the faculty of thinking. Having said that, you can't just put down thought to thinking to energy itself. Thinking is an effect, or energy is getting consumed, but it can't have mass, right? So which means, so what is it then? The entity that I can't see. It's not a physical being. The body is physical, and the energy that runs in my body by way of atoms, nucleus, cells, and so on, that has mass, but not thought doesn't have mass. Why? Because it's not physical. Yet it has a certain effect. It's like, I don't want to use the word water, but I really want to say, you see, if you really grasp this, you will really stop and think. This should get you thinking, because fundamentally this is what is driving everything, this thought. How you think dictates your life, how you think dictates your relationships, how you think dictates all your actions in life, what you attract, what you don't attract, what, and so on and so forth. You see what I'm saying? But what is it that's the driving force that's giving fuel to this engine of this faculty of thought? That's energy, but that energy which has no mass, because thought is not physical. I won't say it's metaphysical, but I'll just say it's a process, right? a process that's taking place. Uh, when you look at it that way, you see that there is some energy that's getting consumed in that, which is its fuel. And I want to give you an analogy. I hope it's somewhat. I hope this will articulate what I'm trying to say in somewhat as close as possible, accurately. So, a wave, water has mass, right? But the water wave that travels through the water in itself is not an entity on its own, right? It's not an entity on its own. It is that which travels through the water, but the effects of that wave, depending on how huge it is or how small it is or how mild it is, can either bring great catastrophe the moment the water crashes to the shore, or crashes on whatever it crashes, or it can just have a mild effect depending on the size of the wave. But the wave itself is not an entity. It is not an entity, but it is something that travels through water, which has mass. Wave has no mass. It is not an entity on its own. It doesn't exist in isolation from the water. You see? So thought, this I, when I say thought, I really want to be specific about this form of thought that has an identity as I. This I is somewhat like a wave. It's really, you see, it goes through non-entity that it is, not a physical entity, not one that you can see, put a finger on and say, there I am, that is me. It is constantly changing and fluctuating all the time. It is never in one place, and that's the very nature of it. It's inherent in the fabric of this I. It's in the very nature of it. There is no way that you can pull this apart and say, this is me. That is my experience. There's no way that you can segregate it. Try as you might, try and observe yourself and see, for instance, when you're trying to make an observation, when you're trying to observe your thoughts and your emotions and your feelings, you will notice that when you take the position of an observer, that which you're trying to observe, let's say you want to observe your anger or your hatred or some pent-up feeling which has put your mind in turmoil, and you want to really sit with it and just ask yourself, like, what is this? Because this is me and you are that. This is my emotion, so I ought to be able to control it. I ought to be able to have some control over it, right? If you say you're an entity in isolation from that which you're experiencing in your mind, we already discussed in the past 4 videos about what experiences are. So there's some experience that's taking place, the residual, the emotions that's running in the human stream of consciousness. So you want to sit there and observe it, but the moment you take the position of an observer, you find that which you want to observe disappears, right? For those people who've actually spent some time and put some thought into this will resonate with them. Try as you might, you take the position of an observer and sit and close your eyes and start watching your thoughts. You will find that they don't really appear, right? Particularly when you want to observe one particular intense feeling. That which you're trying to observe just disappears. What does that mean? The implication is that which you're observing hides behind this I, and vice versa, right? Because it is the same. That which you're observing is the same as the person who's sitting and observing. It's the same as the observer. In other words, you can only observe something when a physical phenomena is something that you can observe as an observer, right? I can sit here and I can observe this camera in front of me because it's a physical thing. But that which goes on in my mind makes up who I am, right? The sum total of me are the sum total of my residual juice that I've taken out of each and every experience in my life. So I don't have an existence in isolation from this. It is in and through this that I perpetuate, that I get my nourishment, that I get my sustenance, my life force, right? Physically, I would have done swimming. Physically, I would have done some activity that I tremendously enjoy, which requires physical energy. Energy is required to perform that. But the residual juice that I took away from that activity was the joy of doing it, or the misery, or the sorrow, or the pain, or the anger, or the hatred, or so on and so forth, right? The residual feelings from each of these experiences. This is what is retained in my memory. And this I perpetuates itself by constantly reminding itself of that which it has done, right? Or that which it wants to project for the future. In between these two, it doesn't actually come up, right? In the present, what are you without your past and without your plans for the future, without your 5-year plans or 10-year plans or whatever dreams you may have for future, or your past completely up until this moment? Let's just say for 1 second you erase the whole thing off. What are you? What will you say you are? Not the labels, not the physical labels for identification purposes like I'm Priya Kannan and you are Dennis and you are something, 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 someone, someone, someone. Let's leave all the physical labels out for a second. Let's erase your past completely and let's erase the future completely. What are you here and now? How would you describe yourself? I already said, let's erase the past completely, which means it's erased. None of what you thought you were in the past you are, just for the moment for the sake of this inquiry, for this moment, let's say. None of what you dreamt for the future you are. We've erased it completely. So minus all this, what are you? You see what I'm saying? If you are, if this I actually is an entity that exists here and now as a thing that I know, like we say, I know I am this, I know I am that. So who are you? Let's erase the past and the future completely out. So you don't know what you were before. Let's just say there's absolutely no memory of what you were before. Not from the medical point of view, such as amnesia or some mental disorders or some mental diseases like Parkinson's and so on. I'm not referring to any of that. I'm just talking for a second. Let's just say the brain has not retained much. The brain goes with the experience, but nothing has made an impact strong enough for it to stay. Create an impression for it to stay in your memory. Psychologically, not physically, you have to still remember. You have to have some memory of where your house is. You have to have some memory of what your name is. Not those things. I'm talking about everything that's put together, this identity that has taken such huge self-importance. That's of paramount importance. It's a centerpiece for everyone, right? Because it's the very root of their existence. If this is shaken up for them, that is simply not acceptable for anybody. But yet nobody ever questions this, possibly because it's part of this strategy of this I to not ever allow one to question or dive deep into it. It's possible because it's running along a certain stream. It's moving in a certain direction, it has its own rhythm because it's taken its own form and shape. It's moving in a certain direction, and when one person tries to go against it, against the grain of it, against the nature of it, which is in the opposite direction, against itself, you see what I'm saying? Then that movement must be a different movement, definitely, because the movement in which this I normally has traveled is through these experiences, is through the past, present and future, right? It's only in the past, through the experiences, it keeps on nourishing itself by way of memories, by way of constantly mulling over in one's mind what's happened, whether it's pleasant or unpleasant, painful or whatever it is, sorrow or some grief or whatever it is. It keeps mulling over and over in its mind what's happened in the past, and in that it derives its sustenance, its nourishment, right? It continues to thrive. It continues to thrive as long as it has its presence, as long as thinking is caught in this rhythm. I'm deliberately saying in this rhythm, because it's not like thinking is going to stop the moment you have this discovery for yourself, right? You still ought to be able to think, to function in this world, and to be able to relate in a world of social interactions. You still ought to be able to think, and to that extent, thought has to be exercised. You can't just sit in one corner and just stay silent. It's not practically possible with a career, with a family, with the world of things, and so on and so forth. But there's a certain grounding, certainly, right? And when I say thinking is caught in this rhythm, what I mean by that rhythm is this pattern of flowing in the stream derived predominantly from one's past. And from that past, you make your dreams for the future. What I can do, what I can't do in the future based on what's happened in the past. Sometimes you may just say, okay, well, that's not entirely right, because in my past, I've had multiple times I've had falls in my life, but I've picked myself up and I've moved on. Well, I'll say hats off to you, but it's still part of the same rhythm. You see, there is this assertion of I repeatedly over and over, because in that very struggle, I mentioned in one of my videos, I think the last video, the video before, the harder the battle, the stronger the nourishment for this I. So when you have a hard fall in life and you pick yourself back up, that struggle to bounce back in life is not going to be an easy one, particularly where you damage your body terribly, or you've had repeated failures in one direction, and you want to pick yourself up and you want to change the whole programming in your mind, and you want to just focus on getting that which you set your mind to, shutting out any thoughts of the past failures that creeps into your mind repeatedly. You see, that's a battle. It's a hard battle, and I say hats off to those people who managed to break through that particular pattern of thinking, that particular pattern of that wave-like, the manner in which that vibration was affecting you has ceased to affect you now, the moment you've had your first taste of something which has been so elusive for you in the past, right? So for instance, let's say you've not managed to get a particular job, or your career has not picked up repeatedly over and over and over and over and over, no matter how strong you are. But after a point of time, you decide, no, something is just not right here. I'm still going to keep staying focused, and I'll still keep pushing forward, right? There are some people with tremendous willpower. And that's great, because you need that. You need that to be able to function in the world. Therefore, this, to some extent, rewriting the programming in your mind is of huge importance. And I can't stress the importance of positive thinking, because it has the way that the ripple effects of that particular thought pattern is entirely different from the ripple effects of thoughts in a negative way, which is why I wanted to discuss energy today. But before that, let me just briefly say this. So when you think you have broken free from that particular thing that was elusive for you, that particular job that had eluded you all along, but now you've had a breakthrough, right? All that's fair and well. But bear in mind, if anything, the sense of I existing in you, this non-entity, has become much more stronger now. Why? Because its reference point now is that hard battle it fought and the sweet taste of success it had eventually. So it's like the harder the battle, the stronger the nourishment for it to assert itself, to repeatedly keep saying, I am here, I am here, I am here. I am the one that got you going in this. You see what I'm saying? But it's actually not real. As long as it's functioning in a way that's favorable to you, it's great, it's your friend. But the moment it turns negative, that same I can be extremely destructive. Extremely. It can, first and foremost, I'll tell you why. So when I was making this analogy of I to a wave, a water wave, it's something that needs energy, right? And yet it's a non-entity on its own, this I, this thought of I. It uses the energy, thought uses energy to be able to think one or to have energy. This I, which is the wave that travels through this thought, whatever thought. But when we say thought, we're really talking about something in the past, right? Thinking is an activity only based on reference to your past. For as long as it's caught in the rhythm of this I. Please, I'll repeat that again. I'm not saying thinking is always an activity that is caught in the rhythm of this past. Because for as long as it is caught in this rhythm of I, the I, which only ever comes up in reference to my past or in reference to my future, but never actually on its own in the present. In isolation completely as an entity, you can never put a finger on it and say, hey, this is me. You can't. Try as you might. Try and observe your thoughts. The moment you take the position of an observer, that which you're trying to observe hides itself. It just disappears from the screen of your mind. What does it mean? The implication is that which you're observing is actually the observing entity itself. You can either take the position of an observer or you can just be that emotion. You follow what I'm saying? I can either sit here as an observer trying to observe my anger, in which case the moment I sit as and take the position of an observer, it will disappear. Which means the anger itself is me. Right? Why I say this? Because this I is getting its sustenance from that particular memory of something that might have happened in the past. Forget about the people and the places and the particular dialogue you might have had that led to that moment of anger. It's that residual anger which you took out of that experience, right? To experience means there's a residual juice that you draw out of each of those activities that you're involved in. By activity, I don't mean just your hobby. I mean everything you do. An interaction is an activity. It's an action, right? When you interact with somebody, there's a certain action taking place. And energy is expended there. And energy is used in everything, in every aspect of your life. And see, this is just so inextricably linked that one can't think of one aspect without thinking of the other. It's all so linked together. Energy, thought, vibrations. Why I say vibrations? I say vibrations because how does this something that happens inwardly, which is not an entity on its own, and yet has an effect on you? If it's not real, if there's no intrinsic value, why are we even bothered with this? Right? If this I is not really real, then why are we sitting and having this discussion at all? What is its relevance? Its relevance is the impact it has in the world. First point of relevance, the most important, the most immediate relevance is that it has an impact on your physical body. It has an impact on all that you touch with your words, with your actions, with your behavior and so on. It has an impact on how you interact with the world, your relationship with your own family, with your own near and dear ones, with the world. It has relevance because collectively, as a society, as a country, it impacts your relations between countries as well. But one has to start from oneself. You can't hope to make a change there without this inward change happening. And this is a collective responsibility. It's not one person, but the responsibility can only start from each one of us as individuals. You can't say it's a collective responsibility and leave it like that as if it belongs to somebody else. You are part of that collective. You're dipping in, tapping into that collective consciousness every second of your life. And everything that you do, every experience adds to that volume of that collective residual emotions, the content in the human stream of consciousness. So you are as much responsible for everything that's going on, individually in your personal life as well as collectively in your immediate environment, as well as a whole in the world. You might find it too far-fetching, but it is not. It's not too far-fetching. If you actually scratch the surface and see this is what you're made up of. You think of yourself, the problem is we tend to think of ourselves as the one that's reaching out to contributing to something that's happening out there in the world at large. When you look at it that way, it might sound very far-fetching. But what if you looked at it the other way around? What if you looked at it from the standpoint of you dipping into that consciousness, which is the collective? You see, the one humanity, one mind, one consciousness into which you're dipping in, and that's the residue that you're tapping into at any given moment in life. Then you will want to sort yourself out, because there isn't another way. You certainly don't want to add to the turmoil, to the conflict, to the disharmony that's going on. You don't want to add to that volume after that. You will stop thinking only from the perspective of an individual after that. You will have a wholesome, broad, encompassing attitude towards all your actions in life. When you think of doing something, you will also put in that by being consciously aware of your actions, you make a very conscious choice of not adding to the volume of disharmony and anger and hatred and prejudice and all the rest of human suffering that's there in this stream. Because you don't want to partake in that anymore. You don't want to be a part of that anymore. If you really don't want to be a part of that, that is. But when you realize that that is all there is for you to dip into, to tap into, and what comes your way is because all the minds in the world, individually, all the individual brains in the world, all the individuals, assuming them to be individuals, right? Their actions have contributed to this. And like a domino effect, you're facing it now. This is all you're left with. This is all you got going. This is the best of the lot. So you're dipping into that. You see what I'm saying? You're part of that. So when you look at it that way, you'll stop thinking for a second. You will never have this thought that it's too far-fetched a theory. It's not a theory and it's not far-fetched. It is so, right? So the choices we make will become that much more conscious. It grounds you. You will be careful because you don't want, there's a saying, don't give to another what you don't want for yourself, right? And what you're getting right now is what you don't want for yourself. But you may think, but I have been a good person, I've lived a good life. Why is this coming to me? Right? People, particularly living in war-ridden countries, it's not their fault individually that they contributed to this war. But collectively, there are the beliefs which when held very vehemently, it clashes against the opposing using energy. You follow? I say energy again here because, like I said, it's a rippling effect. It's a wave-like rippling effect. Because thought uses energy, and energy can never be destroyed. Everything is energy in the universe, within the universe. Without energy, energy can be transformed from one form to another, but it can never be destroyed. Right? So, when that be the case, thought consumes energy, massless energy, because it's not physical. But at the same time, it's a non-entity like the wave itself. It travels through this thinking faculty, through its experiences, by repeatedly mulling it over and over, making itself alive, giving itself a sustenance, even though it doesn't actually exist. Somewhat like a dream in many ways, except that this dream is a very dangerous one because it actually has physical impact on everything that it touches. You see, it's a dream, all right. It doesn't, just like when you're sleeping, you make up all sorts of, the mind makes up on its own, right? You see dreams. It's not intentional. Where do you tap all the dream from? It's not necessarily something that you have known always. There are people and faces you see in your dreams, and sometimes you speak languages that you've never known. You don't even know what language that is. You just know when you wake up that, oh, you know, what was that I spoke last night? So there is this thing that's going on. So you're tapping into something all the time. The mind keeps drawing in this I which exists. It has to keep on be mulling over something or the other. In the waking state, of course, there is the past, and then there is the worries about the future, and or the dreams of the future, and so on and so forth. But in your dream state, it still is active, and it just keeps doing what it does. It keeps coming up with its own meaningful dreams or meaningless dreams or something or the other that it's known from the past, or something that it has never ever encountered before, something that doesn't need to be logical. It's a dream. Like so, in itself, it has been going on in a certain way. And the whole way, this pattern in which the rhythm in which this river is flowing is predominantly based on all that it is, the sum total of its past, and what it thinks it will be or desires it to be in future. So it's always, there is this past, present and future. So for the person who's actually making a journey inwardly, still you're using thought, still it's a thinking faculty, still it's consuming the same massless energy, but the direction in which that thought starts to move is against itself, goes against the grain of itself. You follow what I'm saying? It's not moving in the rhythm of the flow of the river. It's moving in this way, against the grain of itself. Not in the sense of, I challenge you, but in the sense of, I want to know you. Right? And in that there are great revelations, because I see why revelations, because there are discoveries, and these discoveries are not part of this stream necessarily. I don't think so. Because you see, this inquiry that one makes, it takes you on further and further and further exploration, and it seems like it's never ending. The more you explore, the greater are the discoveries, the greater are the revelations. And you realize at some point, how did I ask all these questions? Right? Because this is something that you're asking about your very source, your very structure, the very foundation is being questioned. So you're going against the grain of something, and in that very questioning, there are a great many revelations, there are a great many discoveries, and which leads to more questions. And when you look at the whole scheme of things, the sort of questions it leads you to, leaves you feeling very humbling. It's a very humbling feeling. I say that because everything is so interconnected in some ways. You see, the vast universe, when you're trying to unravel this, you start with yourself first. That's the point where you can really start. You can't just jump directly to metaphysics or quantum theory. But you start with yourself and it leads you somewhat, somewhere there. And when you see the discoveries that it leads you to in the very questioning without actually a definitive conclusion, it's more like revealing with furthermore to go, somewhat like that. It's fascinating, but at the same time it's very humbling because something has obviously created everything in the universe, right? There is something. You can call it what you want. You could say it's God, or you could say it's nature, and so on and so forth. But there is something, a certain intelligence. It's not an unintelligent entity for everything to be sustained the way it is. It's something, I don't even know, entity is probably the wrong word to use, but there is an intelligence that goes on. That is there. Not that it goes on. Sorry if I'm using the wrong usage of words. I'm speaking spontaneously. I'm just making this inquiry in front of this video. None of my video talks are rehearsed or written or memorized. So you might find a blank in between every now and then if I forget what I was saying previously. It is precisely for this reason, because what I'm saying now, I'm saying it here and now. That's all. So I say it's humbling because the magnanimity, the sheer magnitude, the vastness, the expansiveness of this energy or whatever that is, that intelligence, and its magnanimity that touches everything that it's created, right from the smallest particle to everything. You see, particle in the sense, I don't mean it from the point of view of energy. I'm just saying, but everything is energy in a way, but I'm just saying the smallest bit of creation there is to everything else that's been created, like galaxies and universes. There is that intelligence. There is certain intelligence, right? You cannot ignore that. To ignore that would be like hugely ignorant. To think of yourself as this supremely important entity that knows everything. You don't. But I'll call that source. I'll refer to it, this intelligence, I'll refer to it as source or the creator without actually trying to imply that it's a being. That source is, there's a certain magnanimity in that because it's allowed, I don't know about other forms, life forms, but certainly in the case of humans, it is so, it's allowed a certain capacity in humans. It's endowed the human mind, the human brain with a certain ability to be able to make this journey and discover, to make such discovery possible. Where it leads to, I don't know, but the revelations are overwhelming at times because you realize in the big scheme of things, as you unravel this, you just started with a simple question: who am I? What is this I made up of? Right? But that's taken a journey and a course of its own, which is nothing short of fascinating. The more you discover, the more you go into it, there are more and more and more questions. It's a never-ending journey, but a journey that one would not tire of, a journey one would not turn away from. If you really took the journey in all earnestness and scratched your surface sufficiently every time something comes up, and you keep questioning every assumption, everything you've read, whether it's in a science journal or a philosophy journal or whatever it is you might have heard, whatever it is that's been handed over to you by your family, by your forefathers, your religion, and so on and so forth, question every assumption. And somewhere along the way you realize just what a blessing this is in many ways, if there is such a word as blessing really. There ought to be, because the magnitude of this is such that you realize that it's the magnanimity, that is allowed, that touches us in some way without actually having anything to do directly with us, that allows the human mind to be able to penetrate through this complex web of maze of so many structures. So energy, again coming back to energy, it plays a tremendously important role in all our lives. One has to be careful of what one thinks, simply because there is an energy that's caught in that. The energy itself is perhaps not caught, but the energy is used, and there is a wave-like effect produced by this non-entity called I, right? Energy is consumed, it's probably not tainted, but the vibration, the wave-like effect, the ripple effect that thought produces, right? Each thought produces certain effect. We know how when light falls on an object, how the brain makes sense of objects, right? Most people with a science background, I think most people with a non-science background also probably knows this. When light falls on an object, the eye acts like a camera. It captures the image from the light particles bouncing off on an object, right? That is captured by the eye, as long as it's in the visible spectrum of light, which we know as indigo colors. Not that there aren't other colors. There's the infrared on one hand and ultraviolet on the other. Just because it's not visible doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. But the human eye is only equipped to pick the visible spectrum of light. So to that extent, the light particles which bounce off on an object, the human eye captures it like a camera. And that in turn gets converted into electrical signals, which then the brain makes sense of as the objects we know them to be, right? Likewise, there is something that's going on inwardly. Now, I want to be very careful when I say this, because I know I'm dangerously treading the line between scripture and my inquiry, but it has a lot of relevance and it holds water, and so I'm going to just say this. My memories that are there in my mind. Physically, there's an object in front of me, a chair or this camera or this laptop, and the objects around me, which I can see because light falls on it, and I can capture it and my brain makes sense of what they are. Now mentally, what about the mental objects that I already have in my mind, like my memories, right? My memories, how is that coming to light? How is the brain, there are people who forever, or no, there are people, all of us do this, right? We think of our past a lot of the times. We keep thinking of something that might have gone on in our office, a fight we would have had with somebody either in the office or at home, or some pleasant moment, or something that happened a few years back, something that happened in our childhood. Memories stretch us far. It can stretch really far back, because the stronger the memory, the stronger the nourishment for this, right? So, but how does it come to mind? It's not physically happening right now. I can't see the person in front of me right now. And yet the mind captures it. And what's more, if it's a thing of the past, the sting will be less, particularly when it's a painful experience or a painful memory, right? But you relive it. The memory comes alive. It's so animated in your mind, right? You relive it over and over and over, a painful experience or a painful conversation or a humiliating situation or a difficult circumstance or an insulting word or a pleasant and a great experience with someone, or you relive it over and over as if it's happening here and now, to a point where you are completely lost in it for a few moments there in that memory. This happens. All of us can resonate with this, right? We can, certainly. So what is it that's highlighting? There's something that's making the presence of this known to the brain or the mind, right? There is a certain light. So I don't want to conclude, therefore, that you are that light. You are a non-entity. Remember, you only come up in your experience and in your thoughts when you recall your experience or when you project your future, right? This I. It makes its presence felt. So what is it that's bringing it to light? And then I also had this thought, if you just simply concluded that there is a light that's illumining things inwardly, light can only illumine the presence of something. Well, what about sounds? To just talk of light and leave it there, leave it at it, doesn't give you a full picture when you're making an inquiry for yourself. What about the sounds? The sounds are what really gets it going for me. It's the sounds that dictated whether a particular experience was an insult or was it a pleasant conversation and so on. It's the sounds. Physically, the faces were just pictures, faces, that's all. But what was the experience in that? There was the whole appearance, right? The whole thing, like a package put together. The experience of having had an unpleasant conversation with somebody that agitated you or made you angry, right? It's the whole appearance of that person, his expression when he said what he said or when she said what she said, the words, the choice of words she used and the way it was delivered, and the way the person looked, this cutting look, right? Or something pleasant maybe. So whatever it is, there is a whole range of different aspects to that experience which the memory has retained. So what is it that brings sound alive? It's a certain vibration. How does auditory function work? When there is a sound, right, your eardrum vibrates depending on the compression of the air or expansion of the air. The sound waves come in a certain way, and when it hits your eardrums, the eardrum vibrates, and this vibration in turn is converted into electrical signals, and the brain makes sense of the sound as we know them to be. We've given labels for each and every different type of sound, so there's already that identification which with each and every sound that inwardly goes on, which we need. Such identification is needed for practical functioning in the world. But when that same labeling goes on for a lot of other things, like who this I is, I'm a success, I'm a failure, I'm bigger than he is, I'm bigger than she is, I'm more beautiful, I'm more ugly, all these labels, that's why it's gone tremendously neurotic, wrong, a very disorderly way of using energy, which is what we all are, using that energy to think in a certain, some error has happened, this I has come about, and it's finding its sustenance through this experiences of life by way of recalling the past and projecting the future incessantly in one's mind, right? It gets its nourishment through every experience. It keeps adding volume, draws from it again, as a point of reference from that which it has experienced in the past. That's its point of reference for everything, not just for practical functioning in the world, but also for the psychological sustenance. It keeps drawing its body needs a life force energy, which is prana. The I, the entity, really doesn't need. What's the life force energy for it? It only ever comes up in thought. And thought requires energy. You need energy to be able to think. And to that extent, your thought is energy. But the entity itself is not real. The I itself is a non-entity. But its rippling effect, like the wave, that vibration that it sets in motion through its many different thought patterns, again based on its conditioning, its beliefs, its opinions, its values, its judgments, its exposure to the world, its experiences with the world. You see, it sets a certain rhythm in which this wave hits all that it touches. So when you utter a word, that sound vibration is picked up by me. Now that could uplift me, or that could really drain my energy, depending on the value that I've assigned to such a thing that you are saying, right? You see how everything is so interrelated. The values we assign, like I said just a short while ago, the labels for identification purposes, we say a certain sound must be this, like a car horn. You know what that is. You know, you say it's the car horn because you know that that's the sound the car makes, or the engine makes, or your blender at home makes, or your air conditioner makes, your ceiling fan makes. Again, it's not all one sound. That sound is relative, right? It's relative to the objects intervening, the source of the sound, and where you are. The proximity between you, and that source, the fan for instance, right, brings forth a certain sound wave depending on the compression and expansion of air intervening this distance between you and a fan, a ceiling fan or a table fan or whatever, or an air conditioner or something. If there are too many objects, there's bound to be certain obstructions. Likewise, for a ceiling fan, there is a ceiling which compresses. So you see, it's relative how the sound comes, but overall, you know, you identify that as a ceiling fan, so you already know that the sound comes from the fan, right? So what I'm trying to say is, these are all for identification purposes. We've decided that this is such a such sound and this is such a such sound, and it has its own, everything is a form of vibration. Its sound is a vibration because everything vibrates, and it's only through that vibration the brain converts it into an electrical signal and makes sense of sounds as we know it. But inwardly there is a sound of the voice which was harsh or which was very kind to me in the past. That is very alive. When I recall a memory, I'm recalling not just the face of the person, I'm also recalling the voice of that person, the words uttered by that person, the way it was uttered, the delivery, and so on and so forth, right? So all that is a set of vibrations. So you've set in motion a certain vibration, right, depending on the values you've assigned to certain things. Like for instance, if I say he's got a brilliant career going on for himself, he's a great barrister, he's just so well known, I mean, he's so popular, and so on and so forth, you've assigned a certain value to that. If you didn't care much for such things, the value you assign for such a thing will not excite you quite as much as it would if you were to place a higher value for it, right? So depending on the values you assign for certain things, and it could be relative from person to person, it might differ, or on a whole, generally we all agree that one ought to have a very successful career in order to feel very successful, right? These are definitions that you give, but the definitions contain within them a certain value, in other words, a certain tremendous energy you put into that, right? Which assigns a certain value that's going to make the very thought of it is going to bring about a certain vibration in you, right? Something good vibrates at a certain level. Something bad vibrates at a certain level. The frequency with which it vibrates has all got to do with the values you've assigned to it. You see how clever this I is. I, the collective human thought, not just the individual I. I'm talking about the collective humanity, the whole thing, the whole stream. There are assigned values. Universally, we've agreed that there are certain values for gold, for currency. But those are physical because, in a sense, you need all that and so on and so forth for transactions. But this is non-transactional inwardly. Yes, you need a good career. Yes, you need a comfortable life. Yes, you need, everybody wants to be happy. But at the end of the day, what is it that we all are after, right? We all are after just one thing, that fulfillment. Whatever it is that does it for you. But that's really all what you want. Otherwise, you wouldn't engage in any activity. You want that happiness, that fulfillment. Something that makes you feel full. Like, gives you that tremendous inward satisfaction, right? The values may be different. Again, that's what I referred to in one of my earlier videos as triggers. Those triggers are in turn, those stimuli, the triggers may be different from person to person, but what ultimately we all want to derive out of it is this fulfillment, this satisfaction that we all long and crave for, yearn for, long for. But what we don't realize often when we get caught in the rhythm of this river that flows in a certain direction, this rhythm of this I, you see, without ever questioning the assumptions, if you keep flowing in this, you get caught terribly. And you lose yourself because you just don't know any longer what is of value, what is not of value, what is important, what isn't. You go with the flow without really having an insight into this, you see, without really having a mind of your own. And I don't want to say mind of your own because there's really one mind if you look at it. But for the purposes of this inquiry, you're starting with this individual mind, right? What you are here and now listening to this video. So if you carry on that way, you're really living what and how other people, this collective, thinks that you should live. You've given a definition to you based on what's already existing in that stream, right? You've defined your borders based on your experiences in life because it doesn't quite fit in with the values set by society, right? It's fallen below the grade or it's gone above the grade. Based on that, you decide whether you're a success or a failure in life, whether you're beautiful or whether you're ugly, whether you're, educated or not bright, and so on and so forth. But what one must bear in mind is these are assigned values that the human mind itself has assigned, and then it gets caught in that very value that it has itself set. So you really are acting like a puppet on a string, dancing to the rhythm of the vibrations set by thought, that thought has set in motion based on values you yourself have set. You act like a puppet on a string to the values you yourself have set. You see what a trap this is. And then you say, it's been a struggle for me. I have to, climb back up in life. I've had such a great battle. And I'm not saying that people don't suffer. They do suffer precisely because of this reason, because they're caught in this without ever questioning this. When you start making this journey, which goes against the grain of this very I, you no longer are making that journey in that rhythm of the stream. You're going against the stream, which is not part of past, present or future. This inquiry is not of the past or the present or the future. It's not caught in that rhythm. This is going in a different direction against the brain of itself. The entity that's making that inquiry is also itself. Of course, at some point in time, something must have made it stop and ask, and then it's the more it goes in, the more there are revelations, and the more there are revelations, the more it starts to realize just how minuscule it is in the scheme of things. And it's a very humbling feeling that yet that source, I don't want to say creator, that source of all, that intelligence has allowed us this in creation, this faculty, this possibility is wide open in humans too. Come upon a great many things, great many revelations, right? And in that, just that very journey itself, there is a certain order in which the mind is starting to operate. There is a certain groundedness, a certain slowing down of, even in moments when you get angry, even in moments when you try to recall some unpleasant things from the past, you're like, hey, just shut up, really, it's just, you see the futility of it. So I'll end this video today. I have no idea how long I've spoken, but I'm sorry if I've kept you on for too long, but I thank you for listening to it, if you fully listened to it till the end. And I hope you found this helpful and valuable in some ways, and I hope this has piqued your interest sufficiently to make this journey yourself. I will come up with another video in continuation of this next week. Thank you.